Hey everyone, it's Andre here from Nary Warren Bootcamps. I just want to go over a common question about why you shouldn't be eating carbohydrates in the morning if you want to achieve fat loss. Okay, so a lot of fitness gurus and health professionals are out there in the industry telling their clients that they need to be eating their carbohydrates in the morning. However, what I want to do, hopefully by the end of this video, is show you a little bit more about why you should really seriously consider moving carbohydrates predominantly into the later hours of the day and really keep the first half of your day carbohydrate free. If you watched my last video on why you should be moving breakfast into the middle of the day, you'll understand this point quite well. However, if you didn't, I'll just go over it real briefly. Carbohydrates raise insulin levels. Insulin is a hormone which acts in the body to activate glucose transporters, which means it's taking glucose, which is sugar, and moving it out of the blood. Okay, so that happens via the help of insulin. Coupled with raised cortisol, which is a stress hormone, cortisol levels naturally raise up throughout the morning. You switch fat burning mode off. Okay, so with raised insulin and raised cortisol, you switch off fat burning mode. Okay, this is the reason why a lot of health professionals tell you to eat your carbohydrates in the morning, and that is because you are more insulin sensitive in the morning, okay? So insulin sensitivity, what that means is basically this pink thing here is an insulin receptor, okay? So it sits on the cell surface, partially outside the surface and partially inside the surface, sits in the middle there. This is the cell surface here. Let's say it's a muscle cell. So that's the cell surface there. These little things here are called glucose transporters. There are many different types of glucose transporters. Some are always sitting in the cell surface. Some, or a lot I should say, are inside the cell surface. Okay. So let's just say you eat a meal, like some Wheat Bix with some sugar sprinkled on top. Your glucose, your blood glucose, so the amount of sugar in your bloodstream goes up. As the glucose level goes up, your body will release this little thing here called insulin. Okay, so insulin is a hormone which acts on the insulin receptor. Go figure. So what happens is it comes along and it sits inside here. It's like a puzzle piece. It fits perfectly. That will activate the receptor. The receptor will send a message down to the glucose transporters which are inside the cell, which will stimulate them to translocate up to the cell surface. Okay, so once they move here, then they can actively work and start transporting glucose out of the blood and into the cell. So if this was a muscle cell, okay, so let's just say, for argument's sake, this is a muscle cell. It'll go through a number of different processes, but glucose will end up storing inside muscle cells as glycogen. Okay, that's a very simple explanation. So your more insulin sensitivity in the morning, what that basically means is that this insulin has a greater effect on these unstimulated insulin receptors in the early hours of the morning. The effect then diminishes over the rest of the day, and towards the nighttime, the effect it's fairly ineffective on switching on these insulin receptors and moving these to the surface of the cell. So theoretically, it sounds like you want to be eating your carbohydrates in the morning because you're more insulin sensitive. You can effectively move the glucose out of the blood. However, not only the cells which you want to be switched on will get switched on. Fat cells and muscle cells will both get switched on, because of the insulin sensitivity. You can't selectively say, okay, today I only want to switch on these ones, tomorrow I only want to switch on those ones. All of them will get switched on because you have increased insulin sensitivity. In most people, you don't have depleted levels of glycogen as soon as you wake up in the morning. You've got to wait until you work out, or you've got to have been fasting from carbohydrates for quite a long period of time already. However, if your glycogen stores are already full, so like I said before, you store glucose within your liver and muscles as glycogen or in the form of glycogen. To explain glycogen a little bit more, imagine if you were a potato plant and you take in all the energy and you store it, instead of storing it as starch, which a potato plant does, stores it as starch in the form of a potato. You store it inside muscles and your liver in the form of glycogen. Okay, so that's a simple explanation once again, but hopefully you're getting the hang of it and you're understanding a little bit more about how you store and how you process this energy. Okay, so if your glycogen levels are full, there's a certain capacity, a certain level which you can, or a certain amount you can have in the muscle cells and in the liver cells. Once that capacity is full, that excess glucose is going to have to move into fat cells, okay, which means it puts you into fat storing mode by eating these things in the morning if you aren't already glycogen depleted. Also, on top of that, you may be activating satellite cells to turn into fat cells, which will further increase the amount of fat you can store. So you can imagine if you continuously do this over a longer period of time, your fat storing abilities will continue to go up. So what's the solution to this? Basically, with your training, you've got to be looking at your exercise. Yes, there is a bit of work involved. You've got to be looking at your style of exercise, which basically you want to introduce HIIT training or HIRT training, high intensity interval training or high intensity resistance training into your workout routines. Okay, so alongside with a strength and conditioning program, these two things go together. And this one here. So strength training, not so much cardio training. It doesn't happen. It's not that effective with cardio endurance training. So running on a treadmill or running outdoors for an hour won't stimulate this to the same degree as strength training and high intensity intervals or resistance training. But basically, strength training in the evening will manually stimulate muscle glute receptors, glucose transporters to translocate to the cell surface manually. Okay, so in the evening you're less insulin sensitive. Okay, so hopefully you understand that right now. You're less insulin sensitive in the evening. Because of that, fat cell receptors and muscle cell receptors are also less sensitive in the evening. Okay, you've worked out, you've done your high intensity intervals or your high intensity resistance training along with the strength and conditioning program, and you've depleted your glycogen levels. Okay, so once you've depleted those things and you have your carbohydrates at night time, because strength training manually stimulates muscle cells to move the GLUT transporters to the cell surface, carbohydrates at nighttime will come across these little guys here will translocate to the cell surface, and glucose will move into muscle cells, and because of your lack of sensitivity in the fat cells, it won't move into fat cells, is what I'm trying to say. Okay? So hopefully you understand that. I know it's a little bit confusing, but basically key points here is look at your training, carbs at nighttime, strength and conditioning, and stay away from carbs in the morning.